here's an example. Last November in Afghanistan, there was a bombing of a wedding party. Okay, NATO was trying to kill some insurgents or something, and they bombed a wedding party, and they killed 36 people. In fact, they severely injured the bride herself, and they killed 8 members of her family and injured severely 14 members of her family. Now that would strike me as being a hell of a story. You know, I mean, talk about like a human interest story. What could be more gripping than everybody's around at the wedding, getting ready to witness this joyous event, and strafing overhead is a NATO plane dropping bombs and killing 36 people and severely injuring the bride. Now that is a great story from a newspaper's point of view. And it's made all the more important, I would argue, by the fact that we are over there fighting with NATO. So we are kind of complicit in that. So I would think that newspaper editors would logically see that story coming across the wire and think, wow, hold the front page, right? Well, wrong. That story, in fact, I found that story in the Globe. It was on page 21. You know, it's not because it's not an interesting story. I would argue it's politically too charged. It's just too dramatic. If you ran that on the front page with a picture, you know, the blood-draped wedding dress, I mean, there would be rage in Canada. There would certainly be a lessening of support for the war in Afghanistan and a lessening of support for the military and for the enormous buildup in military spending that's taking place in this country. So as a result of that, the story is covered because it kind of is out there in the international reports, but it's buried, it's treated as if it's not very important. So it's on page 21. It doesn't seem like it has much significance. That is highly political, I would argue. I'm just going to give you one other example. Last year Canada signed something called the Civil Assistance Plan. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's a deal between Canada and the United States. And what this deal allows, it allows troops, U.S. troops, to cross into Canada. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? And so, you know, in signing this, it's interesting because the Harper government, I think, realized it was a bit sensitive. Some Canadians might think that was a bit sensitive. So it didn't announce that it had signed this. It just, a week after the thing, it put a small notice in a military journal. But it was actually announced in the United States. So there was a little bit of press coverage, not very much, but it trickled up to Canada. And I sort of thought, well, this will make an interesting thing to write about in my column. So I actually contacted the Canadian military, and I asked them about this thing. You know, and I said, you know, does this mean that U.S. troops could cross into Canada? It's supposed to be for things like, you know, a terrorist attack or something like that. So does this mean they could cross into Canada without our authorization? You know, let's say there's a terrorist attack in Toronto, they move in and, you know, take control of the oil fields in Calgary just to be safe, you know. Anyway, the Canadian military guy said, no, they would only come in with our permission. Now, we did go on to point out that they would be under the tactical control of the Canadian military, but they'd actually be under the ultimate control of the U.S. Commander-in-Chief. But anyway, so they said, you know, this could, they'd only come in with authorization, but they jibe with what I read in the U.S. press release. I thought it was a bit of ambiguity, so I said, well, could you email me the text of the agreement? And he pointed out, well, no, of course I can't do that. It's secret. It's secret. So he didn't say secret. He said it was, I think he said it was not available publicly or something. Anyway, it sort of struck me. I mean, what you could, I actually did write about it in my column, but, you know, like, why wouldn't, think of what that would have looked like as a front page headline. You know, secret pact allows U.S. troops to enter Canada. You know, and think how dramatic that would be. I think that would be downright sensational. And a newspaper, if it was true that newspapers really just want to sell newspapers, that would make a terrific front page story. But I haven't seen a newspaper anywhere pick that story up. Maybe a little mention here or there, but certainly nobody's captured the drama of that story. And I would argue again that that's for very political reasons, because newspaper owners and the people that they've appointed to run their newsrooms don't want to make an issue. They agree with the idea of deeper Canada-U.S. military and economic integration. So this is all just seems fine to them. It's just part of the plan, no big deal. And by writing about it, drawing attention to it, it might stir things up. It's only worrisome if you think it's a problem that Canada's getting too deeply integrated militarily and economically with the U.S., which is apparently the view of most Canadians. But, you know, because we don't actually control what's in the newspaper, we don't even get to see that story. So I'm going to sort of leave it at that, but, you know, basically just conclude by making the point that what I find wrong with newspapers, therefore, is that they are owned by a corporate elite that is interested in using them to put forward a point of view that is, you know, that elite's point of view and is diametrically different than the point of view of most Canadians. I think that's a bit of a problem for democracy. Thank you.